Bonjour, I'm Gonorrhea. Let's discuss a very important topic. Forget teenagers. This affects anyone who resides in any type of culture. Welcome to peer pressure. When you hear this word, you're very likely thinking of young kids in high school, discussing acne, body weight, who's manly enough to be a gigolo, whose dick fits in whose pussy, and so on. If that's all you're thinking, then you have a narrow understanding of peer pressure. You see, peer pressure is not just for young kids. In fact, peer pressure starts before you're a teenager. It begins as soon as you're able to learn any sort of social culture, no matter how basic the cultural grasp may seem. By the way, I'll be making an entire video soon explaining what I mean by culture, but the short version is, culture is more than just ethno-religious culture. Think of all the countless permutations of social media groups you can possibly make on Facebook. Any of those groups can be its own culture. In this video, my main message is this. Peer pressure comes from culture. Where there's culture, there's always morality or moral values. They dictate what's right versus wrong. Morality by itself is useless without weapons that enforce moral compliance, and peer pressure just happens to be one of the most effective weapons to enforce this compliance. Again, culture creates morality, and this morality necessitates peer pressure. A good metaphor is culture equals society, morality equals society's unwritten laws, and peer pressure is the police.
I thought she was 18, officer.
Tell me how many times you've experienced the following. You're in university, in the usual liberal arts classroom like sociology or anthropology, or one of those countless majors that totally provide real-world skills to get you real-world jobs. And so you're sitting there learning about clueless, self-important ideologies like neo-Marxism or social deconstructionism or conflict theory or some postmodernism bullshit. And you're tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. All the textbooks are jerking off each other. You're sick of your classmates sucking the professor's dick as she keeps preaching her presumptuous ideology to your class. And suddenly, you raise your hand. Professor knows a lot. While I agree that our society exploits poor people in countless ways, perhaps there's something to be said about personal responsibility in one's spending habits. Le gasp. You said the PR word, personal responsibility. You're contradicting against your liberal arts professor's favorite ideologies. You failed to agree 100% with all her preaching. In this example, the classroom and the classmates' emotions form the culture. And to be morally compliant would mean to be in agreement with the ideologies expressed and supported by the textbooks and the professor. And if you publicly fail to do that, if you're uncompliant, then shame, guilt, and a failing grade is your punishment. This is something that I had witnessed too many times back in my uni days. The worst was my Latin American Studies course. My professor was yet another neo-Marxist feminist professor. She was a middle-aged Latina teaching left-wing Latin American political perspectives. I could tell immediately that she had grown up in the US as her English was perfect American English, but her Spanish was imperfect and very Anglo. And you know what? She was anti-American. And I don't mean that lightly or in a joking way. I mean, she hated the country in which she grew up. The country that provided her safety, education, and an opportunity in life. And she also hated Canada. As per her own words, she refused to swear allegiance to the Queen upon receiving Canadian citizenship. This woman had a grand total of 2 emotional states, angry and indignant, or smug and self-righteous, just like most of her peers. She would rage against patriarchy, against neoliberalism, against the US or Europeans, against white people, against European cultures, against US military, and against, wait for it, porn. Of course, because she's a feminist. And I remember her complaining about the US support in the Cold War for the dictatorships across Guatemala, Chile, and Argentina. Understandable, as they were ugly dictatorships by all accounts, but nothing about communist Cuba or Venezuela under Chavez, or the indigenous president Evo Morales of Bolivia, who, by the way, has used his ethnicity to gain the trust of the poor indigenous, who would then go on and be exploited by his government, just like always. For those left-wing dictators of Latin America, she said nothing, not a word. For the right-wing dictators, they were nothing less than Satan. And there was this one classmate, he had pretty contrarian views. He was completely reasonable and nice, but he just had different opinions from that stupid professor, as did I. Unlike me, however, he had the balls to disagree publicly. Guess what happened? Not only the professor, but the entire class shat on him. It was so pathetic. And he disagreed on other issues again, and still the class just shat on him. I felt sorry for him. His arguments were worth listening, and yet everyone, including the professor, just rolled their eyes and talked over him, shouting him down, not letting him even conclude his thoughts. There was also another moment when the professor was preaching her racial ideology, saying that race is a social construct. There's no such thing as race, which was invented completely by white racists from Europe and the US and imposed on Africans. Of course, let's completely ignore the fact that since the beginning of recorded human history, people always identified foreigners by their look, and especially by their racial features. The Chinese did this, the ancient Egyptians did this, the seafaring Arabs did this. And while the professor was saying this crap, I looked over and saw the one black girl in my class. She was cute, by the way. This black girl was becoming real embarrassed, and I felt real sorry for her. I could see she was feeling self-conscious. I mean, she was the only black girl in the class. And I wanted to slap that ugly professor's face for saying dumb shit like that. But of course, I couldn't, 'cause peer pressure. The entire classroom was drunk in the professor's ideological worldview. And me, and that one ballsy guy, and this shy black girl, we were isolated loners. We had to comply with this peer pressure, or at the least, not resist publicly. Or else. Folks, this is the power of peer pressure. Professors like her, who love to preach about the power of critical analysis and then use peer pressure and groupthink to make us comply with their worldview. They are part of the problem. This isn't just about insecure teens in high school. That said, their acne is pretty f***ed up. Let me know if you have any feedback on the video. I read all your comments. If you like what you see, subscribe and give me a like so I know. And if you want me to KYS, let me know how in the comments.